On a summer evening in 1980, Italia Flight 870 vanished from radar over the Tyrrhenian Sea. What followed was decades of uncertainty as the tragedy became Italy's most controversial aviation disaster, surrounded by conspiracy theories and allegations of a multi-nation cover-up. It is the 27th of June 1980. Aerolínea Italia Flight 870 is boarding its 77 passengers at Bologna Airport and is preparing for its journey to Palermo, Sicily. A minor technical issue with the McDonnell Douglas DC-9, combined with adverse weather conditions, delays the flight by an hour and 53 minutes. Despite delayed departure, the flight proceeds smoothly, maintaining routine contact with air traffic control. At 20:57, ATC asks the crew to report back for descent instructions. The crew acknowledges, but this would be Flight 870's final transmission. Just 2 minutes later, the aircraft vanishes from radar. Out of the 81 people on board, not a single soul makes it out alive. In the initial surface search, 39 bodies were recovered from the sea, roughly 100 kilometers northeast of Ustica Island. Floating among them were parts of the wreckage scattered across a wide area, suggesting that the plane had broken apart mid-air before impacting the water. With so little evidence, nothing could be determined for certain. Accidents at the time were investigated by an independent body of experts, like the America's NTSB or the UK's AAIB. But this wasn't the case in Italy. Instead, the task fell to a mix of organizations, each launching their own investigations, including but not limited to the judiciary, aviation regulation authorities, and even the military would conduct its own internal inquiry. Most people involved had little to no experience in investigating aviation accidents, but amidst all this confusion, one thing was clear: the Italian public wanted answers. The Ministry of Transport was the quickest to act. Just 2 weeks after the crash, its minister Rino Formica reported to the Senate that the investigation had ruled out the possibility of external interference. Instead, it pointed to technical issues and structural fatigue as potential causes. The airline Italia was already heavily in debt even before the disaster, and was accused of causing the massacre by not following proper maintenance procedures. The crash pushed the company further into financial ruin and would be declared insolvent the following year. The accusations, however, remained unproven, and as investigators struggled to pin down a cause, a new possibility began to emerge. Just 2 months after the crash, a bomb exploded at Bologna railway station, killing 85 people and injuring 200 more. The attack was orchestrated by a neo-fascist group and was the deadliest during a period that would become known as the Years of Lead. This period in Italy was characterized by political violence involving assassinations and terrorist attacks. The Air Force had launched their own investigation into Flight 870 shortly after this, but only in 1984 did Defense Minister Giovanni Spadolini stated that traces of an explosive device were found on the wreckage, later confirmed to be T4, a popular choice for bombs made by the far-right terrorists. It seemed more than plausible that the DC-9 could have been brought down by one of the many terrorist attacks at the time. So far, only the Ministry of Transport and the Air Force had launched their investigations, and they both came to a dead end, as the recovered wreckage just wasn't sufficient enough to draw conclusions. However, the mounting public pressure led to an extensive salvage mission to be launched by the French company called Ifremer, and they recovered half of the wreck by the following year along with the black boxes, the contents of which could reveal a much-needed clue. That's what the investigators hoped, at least.
Buonasera, via 870. 115 miglia per Papa Serra, scusate, mantiene 250. Italia 870, vorrei la sì, Rai lo otteniamo intorno agli 1-3. La qualità internazionale è soltanto previsto. A Rai nessun ritardo, chiameremo per la discesa 870.
This last radio exchange, along with flight data, both suggested no issues on board, although there was one thing that didn't shake the investigators, because besides radio, the black box also recorded cockpit audio from 2 locations. Here's what the last 10 seconds of the better one sounds like. The noise is rather terrifying, but completely normal. Let me clean it up so we can hear the essential part. Many believe that this gua right at the end could be the first syllable of the word guarda, which is Italian for look. Could the pirates have seen something? By this point, the people of Italy had endured nearly a decade without answers, so even something as insignificant as a syllable would hold merit. A clear lack of transparency was felt from the government in the matter, specifically from the military, as people began to suspect foul play and the intentional withdrawal of information such as radar data. And these suspicions would be seemingly validated in 1989 when a certain report made the headlines. A few years back in 1984, Judge Vittorio Bucarelli appointed a commission with engineer Massimo Blasi as coordinator. His investigation had also confirmed the existence of T4 along with TNT on one of the seats. They also found a hole towards the aft of the plane which exhibited a different damage pattern to the rest of it, suggesting a possible location for a missile explosion. They later found fragments in the back of the cabin belonging to the whale well and the forward parts of the fuselage, which raises the obvious question: how did they get there? Could an explosion have occurred in front of the plane? Despite much of the wreck still missing, and only circumstantial evidence, the Blasi Commission decides on issuing a report to the judge. Its content is in clear favor of a missile launched by an unidentified aircraft, one that American expert John McIdall had confirmed the existence of in the form of radar tracks that appeared far to the west of the DC-9. The public was not surprised. They felt vindicated to have their suspicions confirmed. After all, their doubt had been seeded a long time ago. Andrea Purgatori, a journalist for Italy's largest newspaper, recounts the following.
Quella sera, circa un'ora dopo che la traccia di quell'aereo era sparita dai radar, ho ricevuto una telefonata da un controllore del centro di controllo di Ciampino che aveva in carico l'aereo e che mi disse: guarda che quest'aereo l'hanno abbattuto, non ti far fregare perché l'hanno abbattuto.
Purgatori's claim was a bold one. He wasn't going to let the opportunity pass. He was well aware that this could be the news story of his life. The possibility of a missile strike was already present in an article written by him the following day. A little more than a month later, the word missile made the headline of his latest article. Similarly, other writers began to consider the theory, especially as new revelations emerged. On the 18th of July, just 2 weeks after the disaster, a fighter jet later confirmed to be a Libyan MiG-23 crashed in the Silla Mountains. At the time, due to the Cold War, the Mediterranean was a military hot zone with frequent air exercises. Tensions were high between NATO forces and Soviet-backed Libya. The new theory proposed by the media was that the MiG-23 could have been shadowing the flight when it was engaged by NATO fighters and subsequently hit by a missile meant for the enemy jet. The idea of shadowing is based on the fact that a radar's resolution is limited, and in more ways than one. The further away a radar looks, the larger the area that is being sampled. Theoretically, there can be wiggle room for multiple aircraft to return as one object. However, the fighter must close to within a few hundred meters and a degree or two of bearing, a maneuver that no official fighter pilot training seems to include due to the risks involved. Under overlapping civil ATC and military radar coverage, such shadowing proved far too impractical and thus highly unlikely to have been utilized. Despite this, the crossfire theory would gain ground when during the wreck's recovery, an external fuel tank was discovered. This gives a fighter more range, but also has the ability to be jettisoned in danger to make the fighter more agile. It was never confirmed what plane it belonged to. The MiG found in the mountains was seemingly without external fuel tanks, but it also had no armament. The decomposition of the pilot suggested the crash to have taken place at least 20 days prior, putting it right around the time of the DC-9. The aircraft, however, didn't show signs of combat damage, and investigators would later conclude that the pilot had lost consciousness and glided into the mountainside. And so we have circled our way back to 1989. Recovery of the wreck is underway, and Blasi's findings are issued. To complicate matters, a whole new version of the missile theory emerged, this time featuring a failed assassination. Muammar Gaddafi, leader of Libya, was a highly controversial figure in international politics, known for his tense relationships with Western powers. By the late 1970s, his regime had become a target of Western intelligence operations, with accusations that France and the US were seeking ways to remove him from power. According to another one of Purgatory's articles, Gaddafi believed he was the target of the attack that brought down the civilian airliner, and stated, "My plane was flying in that area, it was headed to Italy for repairs, and the Americans thought I was on board." And added, "The Americans hit a Libyan plane and an Italian plane." Years later he would still hold the same belief, as he said in a speech in 2003. "The Americans were sure that I was on board that plane, and that's why they shut it down." Amidst all the doubt and speculation, 2 of the 5 experts of the Blasi Commission would dissociate themselves from the report delivered to the judge about a missile strike. Every thread that investigators followed so far led down to a dead end. No matter how many investigations were launched, they all seemed to come back inconclusive. Il muro di gomma, literally meaning the rubber wall, is how this phenomenon would come to be called, since investigations seem to just bounce back. A movie by the same name also aired in theaters in 1991, written by Purgatory. It tells the story of his journalist work into the case. The movie also pushed the narrative that people closely involved with the disaster had purposefully withheld or even destroyed information, and that a massive cover-up was taking place involving multiple nations. The movie won multiple awards and was probably one of the most influential pieces of media that formed the public's opinion on the disaster. The investigation at this point passes into the hands of investigating Judge Rosario Priore, who commissions yet another panel of experts, the 5th one overall, this one led by Professor Aurelio Misiti. This new panel is tasked with conducting a thorough forensic and structural analysis of the wreckage, the recovery of which had finally concluded. With international experts finally on board, could this panel be the one to tear down the rubber wall? Misiti's team included Frank Taylor, a seasoned British air accident investigator who worked for what is now known as the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, one of the most respected in its field in the world. Taylor's qualifications were perfect for the job, as he had previously worked on 20 cases, including Pan Am Flight 103, a plane brought down by a bomb planted in the cargo hold. At the time, he helped create a software program to check and predict the location of widely scattered debris. It allowed investigators to reconstruct the trajectory of individual fragments, factoring in their initial momentum from explosion, altitude, and wind shift. Taylor had used the same software during the recovery of the DC-9 as well, and pushed commission members at the time to shift to the calculated areas. Initially they dismissed the recommendation, but eventually obliged, resulting in much of the wreck being found and returned from the predicted areas. The investigators' jobs, first and foremost, was to piece the new parts together like some horrible jigsaw puzzle. Remember the area with the different pattern towards the aft of the plane? It turns out most of those pieces had been incorrectly placed, despite being correctly labeled. They actually belonged to the front, where the plane had crumpled from impacting the water. A better part of the day was spent checking every piece and making sure everything was where it belonged. So, with the wreck in its final state, what did the investigators learn? Let's start with the engines. The most interesting bit of damage on the port side is red paint markings from the fuselage. The starboard engine cowlings had a variety of dents, cuts, holes, scratches, and paint marks on the left side. All this damage was consistent with bits of the fuselage impacting it. On the center fuselage, skin panels with scratching, bulging, and so-called quilting pointed towards internal overpressure. The upper rear fuselage was in larger parts, except near the toilet area, and the lower fuselage just below the toilet also showed signs of severe overpressure. Every piece from around the toilet indicated the same: the rolled back cargo door, distorted frames adjacent to starboard engine, bulging of toilet wall, downward bending of floor structure, the tissue holder bent outwards, and the massive damage suffered by the wash basin. All signs were pointing to an onboard explosion, and no entry hole for a missile was found. To be thorough, Taylor's team conducted an explosion test using a decommissioned DC-9's parts. The resulting damage patterns were near identical to that of Flight 870. Everyone on the team was convinced that there was no other explanation for the damage exhibited by the plane. They of course did consider alternative scenarios. A missile exploding near the plane was completely ruled out, as not a single piece of skin showed signs of fragmentation damage, like what can be seen on the much more recent Azerbaijan plane. One or multiple inert missiles penetrating the aircraft was also ruled out, with no possible entry or exit locations found. Finally, an in-air collision or near collision doesn't explain the damage near the toilet area and traces of explosives. With all evidence considered, the Mississippi team proposed the following happened on that fateful summer evening. In the rear lavatory of the plane, a relatively small explosive detonates. The force pushes the toilet walls outwards, and parts of the upper and starboard skin are ejected, some hitting the engine. The weakened structure around the toilet causes the starboard engine to fall away, and the black box recorders are also cut from power. As the top of the plane begins opening up, the port engine detaches, soon followed by the entire tail section. Without a tail, the plane pitches down violently into a near vertical fall, causing the left wing to break. All of this occurred in about 7 seconds. The findings were about as conclusive as one could hope for. Unfortunately, that didn't matter. I am sure you haven't forgotten about the other threads, and neither did the people of Italy. On a meeting in 1994, the Technical Commission was told that their report was unusable. The judiciary was seemingly not prepared that another explanation could even be possible. They knew that accepting the bomb conclusion as the truth would be difficult, if not impossible, for the public to accept at this point. And while the Mississippi panel was conducting its investigation, Priora was examining the other aspects of the disaster, even the most conspiratorial ones, and his findings were seemingly not aligning with the technical teams. Throughout the investigation, Italian military officials provided inconsistent testimonies, and crucial radar records from the night of the accident were found to be missing or destroyed. Furthermore, several witnesses and military personnel connected to the case passed away under suspicious circumstances, overall 13 people. Some of them are lost right before being able to give testimonies, and while the information they could have provided vary in substance, those who support the missile theory, and by extension the cover-up theory, find this part of the mystery greatly compelling. Out of the 13 personnel, however, 11 is deemed coincidental, with little room for doubt. The circumstances of the last 2 are much more intriguing, but ultimately don't present enough for Prior to draw conclusions from. We continue down the trail of controversy with the USS Saratoga, an American aircraft carrier that was in the vicinity at the time. In fact, Brian Sandlin, a former US Navy soldier serving on the carrier, confirmed in an interview with Purgatory in 2017.
Salpiamo intorno a mezzogiorno. Quel pomeriggio partimmo da Napoli con i motori a tutta forza. La sera lanciammo i caccia, completamente armati. E al loro ritorno sulla nave notammo che non avevano più l'armamento.
Priore, however, had long concluded with utmost certainty that the Saratoga was docked on the 27th. The answer arose from an unexpected source. His idea was to seek out photographs of beddings from the days around the disaster. Multiple images from the 27th and the 28th depicted newlyweds with the carrier appearing in the background. Of course, the Saratoga could have set sail and come back in time, but after careful consideration, Priore deemed this to be impossible. As such, the judiciary continued investigating radar tracks and Air Force personnel who were accused of high treason and abetting among other offenses. Many of the allegations couldn't be pursued due to the statute of limitations, as the disaster occurred more than 15 years prior. Eventually, all charges would be dropped due to a lack of evidence, and no one was ever convicted. Judge Rosario Priore closed his extensive investigation in 1999, culminating in a comprehensive 5,500-page report, concluding that the plane had most likely been shot down. It is truly fascinating how much circumstantial evidence points at a military operation, and yet the Technical Commission's findings seem so conclusive. This is the reason why the Ustica massacre, as it became known after the Blasi Commission, is a topic so controversial and active to this day. Anytime it's brought up, arguments are thrown about more often than not without any sources. For example, the infamous phrase "guarda cos'è" or "look what's that" is quoted so often, yet if you remember the recording, only the syllable "gua" was heard. I had long dismissed this phrase as misinformation based on pure conjecture and word of mouth, but as it turns out, there is more to it. In 2020, the Italian news outlet Rai News cleaned up the original cockpit voice recording, and by doing so revealed that in the final seconds of the tape, the infamous quote can be heard loud and clear. I'll let you be the judge of it. Something about this audio file seemed off to me though. After going down what was the weirdest rabbit hole of my entire research, I found that this audio clip is in fact fake. The news media Panorama summarized it well. The original tape was transcribed dozens of times with no disputes that only Gua is heard, and that it was said by the pilot, while Rai News claims that the phrase to have come from the co-pilot. Furthermore, Rai News only had access to digital files which simply contain no additional data. Worst of all, the phrase is actually said over 8 minutes prior on the original recording. Hear for yourself. The phrase is sewed together with other bits of recording that don't even belong to the cockpit voice recorder but most likely the radio station, since the casual conversations in the cockpit are missing. Other news outlets were quick to catch on to Rai News' quote-unquote discovery, but after they found the source to be of dubious origins, all major outlets took down their articles, leaving the only easy-to-find news of this misinformation today to be the Rai News article itself. It is now worth mentioning that I tried approaching this topic with a completely neutral mindset, but I found myself in a rabbit hole where even the best archival sites of the accident include fake audio clips. How do you navigate a topic filled with misinformation? Occam's razor does come in handy, which states that when presented with competing hypotheses, you should prefer the one that requires the fewest assumptions. Actually, even this principle itself is often misinterpreted to mean that the simplest answer is the correct one, while it's more accurate to say that the simplest answer is the one most worth investigating. Confirmation bias will make sure that those looking for evidence in favor of whatever they believe in will find it. People in power are also not immune to such biases, and thus their side of the story should also be taken with a grain of salt. Interestingly, Frank Taylor was completely oblivious to the controversies surrounding Ustica when he worked on the case. Only after the rejection of his team's findings did he become aware of it. He decided to write a follow-up paper to document the thought process that led to the team's conclusion. It is a fascinating read, and I highly recommend checking it out for yourself. The one section that I would like to point out, however, is on the infamous radar tracks. It was calculated that the probability of those returns being false was 1 in 100,000. These radar tracks for the longest time have been the most convincing piece of evidence for a missile strike. But the technical team also calculated the odds of an aircraft returning only those and no other traces. The result was also around 1 in 100,000. thus the radar couldn't prove nor disprove the presence of an aircraft. As a result, this also makes it to the list of inconclusive threats. The Ustica massacre is the perfect storm, a mess that began spiraling out of control from the very start. And what it has done was distract us from what matters most of all. 81 innocent lives were lost. Whether it was due to a terrorist attack or an operation gone wrong, their deaths were the result of selfish decisions made by those who saw human lives as collateral. Relatives would only be compensated from 2015 onwards, after multiple courts over a number of trials ordered the Italian government to pay families and heirs of the victims multiple million euros each. To crawl out of the rabbit hole, I decided to visit the Ustica Museum in Bologna. The wreckage of the plane is displayed there in what is truly a one-of-a-kind museum. With all pieces of the plane found on display, together with 81 flickering lights and black mirrors, it is a genuinely eerie display. The camera doesn't do it justice. If you are ever in Bologna, I highly recommend visiting the museum. Moving forward, Italy has established an air accident investigation agency, hopefully meaning that the chaos surrounding Ustica will never be repeated.